Okay, so the second review for this morning, we're still staying in Washington, D.C. We're going to the other side of Washington, the west side of Washington, area along the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C. And Abby Winter is going to introduce to us the plight of the polar bear. Her committee was comprised of Ming Yu, who's the chair, Peter Noonan, and yours truly. Abby.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my committee members, which consisted of Brian Kelly, Peter Noonan, Stephen Hurt, and I would like to send a special thank you to my chair, Professor Ming Hu, for all of her help and support throughout this whole entire process. I would also like to thank my family for all their support, and my fiance for his support, and also for all of my peers, for I would not be standing up here without all of you, literally everyone who's sitting here. So with that, I'd like to start. So my project is titled Climate Change Awareness Through Design, Saving the Polar Bear. So I'm going to begin with the problem that I found, talk about the program and the users, and look at the criticisms that I found, and then dive into the site selection and analysis, and then ultimately the design. So I want to start off with the problem and ask everyone in the audience a series of questions. So I would love some participation. Okay. So, how many people believe global warming is happening? Raise your hand. So this is the result I was expecting from all of you in an architecture school. However,
I think you have to be closer.
I do?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. I thought my
the
arms.
screen has a lot of metal in it.
Thought my arms were longer. Yeah,
Like
sorry.
my head.
Okay. So.
Just sit that into the microphone.
So in actuality, only 70% of people in the US believe that global warming is happening, just less than what we've seen in this room. How many people believe that global warming will harm them personally? Raise your hand. Again, same. So only 40% of people in the US believe that global warming will harm them personally. But 70% of people believe global warming will harm plants and animals, but not themselves, which I thought was strange. So this thesis is based on the assumption that climate change is real and it is happening. So we see it happening in the United States with Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma just recently. And then we see it globally in China, where they can't breathe because of the smog, and the Caribbean, where these homes are being taken over by water. So just a statistic that the sea ice is in fact melting from the climate change and decreasing at about 11% each decade. And therefore sea level is rising. So since this study in 1995, sea level has risen about 84 millimeters. How many people believe that global warming is caused mostly by human activity? Okay, everyone again. Only 53% of people believe that global warming is caused mostly by human activity. But the facts show that since the industrial era, there is this direct correlation between carbon dioxide and the global temperature rise. So since pre-industrial times, it has risen about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And then lastly, how many people have heard about global warming in the media at least once a week? All of you, because we click on the same links and they lead us to the same things. But only 24% of people hear about global warming in the media at least once a week, which is kind of alarming. So ultimately, this thesis is about saying that climate change is an issue about public and global awareness. And I am looked into how architecture can help to create public awareness about climate change. So the program. So I looked at a couple different programs to see what types of institutions we're trying to educate about climate change. I looked at memorials, and this is a memorial design proposal for the National Mall. So they're planting a series of trees, and then as sea level rises, it kills off the trees. So it's this long-lasting memorial of what could happen. This is a museum proposal. It is dark. This is a museum proposal in Lower Manhattan. The buildings are built into the landscape, so you can see it on the left that sea level is rising, and people can understand that. At the same time, This design creates some berms to prevent the water from coming into the city. So both of these memorials and museums, they're futuristic designs. So the only thing that I could find that actually deals with climate change is the zoo. So historically, zoos were for leisure, scientific study, and they were just a collection of animals for the wealthy. But currently, they're all about educating people about these animals and their situations and conserving the animals. And they do this through two tactics. So they use landscape immersion, which is basically virtually immersing the visitor in the same natural habitat that the animal would be in the wild into the habitat. So here in the Bronx Zoo, you can see that they tried to incorporate some of the sea ice into the exhibit. But it's actually just concrete, it's not real ice. And then also, they tried to tell a story through the exhibit. So I visited the Bronx Zoo and they have specific zoo designers, and their idea, they want to awe the visitor when they come to the site to make them fall in love with the animal. Next, they want to educate the animal on the plight of the animal through a series of diagrams and signs. And then they want to tell the visitor how that they can play their part to help save the animal. So in essence, this thesis is a combination of a monument, a museum, and a zoo habitat. So the users of this design would be the visitor, the zookeepers, and the animals. So not only did I have to look at the human building code, I had to look at the animal code as well. So you might be asking why use the polar bear for this, to raise awareness about climate change, because there are other animals that are in fact endangered. I chose the polar bear because it is nationally known as the flagship species of climate change. So it is a vulnerable species and it is in danger of becoming extinct. So in 2017, there's about 25,000 polar bears, but scientists project that in 2050, there will only be about 9,000 polar bears left, so about a third. And this is mainly happening, so contrary to popular assumption, the polar bear is not dying because of the heat and that they're becoming overheated. They're in fact dying because their habitat is melting. So since the sea ice is melting, they can not hunt for their seal prey, which is what they use for food. So in fact, they're starving. So I wanted to show you guys a video of the polar bear dying, but many of you may have seen it. I can send the link out later. It's become very viral, conveniently 2 days before my thesis. And it shows a polar bear essentially scourging for food because it is starving. And it's very sad. So this is essentially what my thesis is trying to raise awareness about. So next I looked at the criticisms of zoos, and I tried to see if they were actually implementing this landscape immersion and storytelling effectively. So first I had to look at the actual landscape, where the polar bears are from. So they're normally from Russia, Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Norway. And they live towards the coast, so by the Arctic Ocean and the tundra, and they also live inland, which is called the taiga, so it's still a colder region, but there's more vegetation. So their landscape elements consist of cold sea, salt water, sea ice, seals for their food, sufficient space and sea ice for hunting, long horizontal views, and cold air temperatures. However, for this thesis, I really focused on these three elements, so the water, the sea ice, and the seals, because I really want the visitor to understand this relationship in the wild. Next, I looked at the vegetation. In the taiga, there's coniferous trees, and in the tundra, there are mosses and grasses. So here is, again, the example of the Bronx Zoo. The landscape immersion is on par. There's, like I said before, there's sea ice, but it's concrete. They do try to add some taiga, coniferous tree vegetation, but there are no seals. And the storytelling, there's the animal, you fall in love with it. There are some signs that tell you what's happening. They don't actually mention climate change. They mention overhunting, which I found strange. And then the react portion, how you can help, they tell you to join the Wildlife Conservation Society to help in the efforts. So they really don't tell you what you can do to help. Next, I looked at the site. And originally I thought I could build on the last ice region, which is in Nunavut, a territory of Canada. But since this thesis was all about education and awareness, I didn't think I would reach a large enough audience by placing it here. So then, naturally, I switched to the National Mall, which receives about 21 million visitors a year. And the whole point of the National Mall is to educate about all different types of subjects, except they're not educating about sustainability quite yet. And this thesis is also slightly a little bit political, so by placing it on the National Mall, it's very close to policymakers who may not believe in climate change at the moment. So I looked at a few bodies of water on the site, and ultimately I chose Constitution Gardens, which is a very underutilized site. I'm not from this area, so I did not know about this site until I talked to my peers about it. So that was one reason, and then it's a large body of water for expansive areas for the animal to swim or to walk. It's also an urban oasis on the mall. Another reason I chose it is because it's in close proximity to the Smithsonian Museums. It's directly on axis with the new African American Museum. So I was imagining someone coming down Constitution Avenue and visiting the different Smithsonians would also come across my building. Also, this site represented the taiga, the tundra, and the Arctic areas, but on a very smaller scale. So you have the tree area, the tundra, and then the Arctic Ocean, which is the pool itself. Also, there's a lack of amenities on this site, so I found myself really hungry when I was walking around my site visiting. So I incorporated a cafe, a gift shop, and a public restroom. And then ultimately, I decided to settle on the east side of my site because all the traffic and foot traffic are coming from the north and the east side. So it would be a natural stopping point for someone who's visiting the World War II Memorial to come north, someone who's on the Washington Monument to come east, and then someone who's coming from the Smithsonian's to come from the north. So now I'm going to jump into the design a little bit. And most of the things I'm showing in my presentation are also on the board. So this design ultimately consists of the gem building, which is in the water, and this houses the polar bear and the seals in my exhibit. On land, we have 2 buildings, and then in between those 2 buildings, we have a memorial space. So the 2 land buildings have an upper story and a lower story. The northern building houses the cafe and the museum below, and the southern building houses the zookeeper and off-exhibit area, because the polar bear needs somewhere to retreat when they don't want people staring at them 24/7. And then they have a gift shop down below. For my process, I looked at different precedents and the relationship between the human and the animal. So there's a traditional zoo that you're probably most familiar with, where you just walk and see an animal in a glassed-in area. There's also threshold designs where you can walk through a tunnel or bridge and then look to either side and you can see the animal. There's a few futuristic designs that Big is doing that incorporates a 360 view. So you're basically in the center and the animals are around you. And then opposite of that, you're on the outside looking in. So for this design, I incorporated this threshold idea. So walking through the 2 land buildings to get to the gem building. And then I also incorporated a version of the 360-degree view, but I turned it into a 180-degree view. So when you're in the gem building, you come down and you're sitting in an amphitheater space, and then you can look to the left, to the right in a 180-degree fashion and see the seal and the polar bear in this relationship. So on this site, I really tried to focus on this view. So it's very heavily wooded on the exterior, and you can't really see that many buildings. The only building you can definitely see is the Washington Monument. So in the middle of Constitution Gardens, there's a little island called Siner's Island. And this is the view standing on the island, looking towards the monument. So I tried to keep this view in mind when I was designing. And in my first initial designs, I tried to create smaller versions of the National Monument. At the same time, I was thinking about the shape of an iceberg. So combining all 3 of my structures, the 2 land buildings and the gem building, together from Siner's Island look like an iceberg. And then I also tried to keep this storyline in mind. So I was talking about before that they want to awe the visitor at first. But I kind of switched it around, and I decided that I want to shock the visitor first and really make them understand what the problem is. And then I want them to fall in love, and then I want them to be educated. So then I went back and I incorporated my 3 different programmatic elements with these 3 pieces of my storyline. So I'm going to walk you through my site through a series of drawings, and those drawings are also on the board. So like I said before, I'm imagining people will congregate to the east side of my buildings, coming from different areas of the mall. And this is what they would see coming from the World War II Memorial. And then this is someone coming from the Washington Monument, so they can see these really dense buildings to the east, or the left and the right, but then in the background they can start to get a glimpse of this gem building. And then this diagram, I'm imagining people are ramping down through the monument, and these are a series of section cuts showing people ramping down. So this is the monument of the site, and I tried to incorporate elements that are found on the National Mall. So most of the monuments have stone, statues, water, and quotes. So I also have those same elements in my design. So when you're in the first area, there's a quote that says there's 25,000 polar bears in 2017, and the water is basically still. Next, you ramp down, and it says that there are only 9,000 in 2050, and the water feature starts to trickle a little bit heavier. And then in 2075, there are 0 polar bears left, and the water becomes a lot stronger current and ultimately turns into a waterfall. So here is a view of someone after they've come down the memorial and are walking across the bridge to the gem building. And again, this is to just highlight this relationship between the seal, the water, and the polar bear. This is just a shot of that relationship. So they can walk around on an upper level and really get up face to face with the polar bear, or they can go back down to that amphitheater. And this is a shot of the museum. So I'm imagining there's a lot of photographs from Paul Nicholin, who's very famous for taking photographs of polar bears. And there's some skylighting incorporated that look like icebergs. So here is a more detailed plan of what I'm imagining. The red line is the forced pathway that I would like everyone to take. And after you're done at the gem building, you retreat back into the museum and the gift shop. So since this is a thesis about educating about climate change, I wanted to incorporate sustainable design tactics. So here you can see on the land buildings, they're oriented towards the south, so they take advantage of the sunlight. There are solar panels on the northern building, and then on the southern building, I incorporated natural lighting through skylights for the polar bear. I incorporated a few shading devices on the gem building so that the animal would not be as hot. Over there you can see that there are operable windows as well as low E glazing. There's a shading screen above. It's oriented towards the south, and then this ramping system that they climb up creates shaded spaces underneath for the animal to retreat. And then I'm also imagining a sort of ceramic frit glazing pattern that starts more opaque on the bottom, more transparent at the top, and creates the sort of convection cycle that funnels the air through the bottom up to the top. So it's an open air structure. I also incorporated the living machine system in the back. So I added taiga plants that can also grow in this area through my system. So it's filtering the black water back from the building through this living machine system, and then as a closed loop and goes back into the building. I also added a lot more trees to the site. So there are mostly deciduous trees on the site, and I added coniferous trees to the perimeter to allow the polar bear views of these trees to make it feel more like home. And I added some permeable, a few different pathways just to make it easier to come to the site. And I added permeable pavers that would allow service trucks to come. And I also tried to do minimal grading to the site to not harm the site, and I used the original terraced stairs idea. So currently that's what it looks like. There's terraced stairs, and I I use that same idea to get people down from the top to the bottom. It's at about an 8-foot elevation difference. And also, I did not incorporate any parking because I really wanted to encourage visitors to be sustainable from the beginning. There are many metro stops, as you all know, and many bus stops that people can take to get to this site. And people are naturally walking around the mall anyway. So, in conclusion, through design, I believe we can reverse climate change and save the human race and the polar bear. So I'm imagining that something like this could be incorporated on the National Mall in the future to help educate everyone who comes to visit every single year. Thank you. And now I'll open up the questions for all of you.
There you go.
Okay, this is fascinating. You did a fantastic job of presenting it, great research, really well designed, and so the context, that's the context of all my comments, because I guess some of my comments have to do with the sort of suite of sustainability technologies, and then some of them are kind of formal, because you're inescapably in a landscape where that really counts. And so they sort of overlap, I guess I could say. My first thought is the solar array, you're treating the building somewhat differently. And so you put solar on one building but not the other. Mm-hmm. And then you're using FRIT on the gym building instead of, for example, integrated PV in the glass itself. And so I guess one thought is whether that's enough, that array, what's it giving you?
Yeah.
Is there a hot water solar that could also be added? That sort of leads to a kind of formal comment. You've got the dilemma of a 1 + 1 + 1 currently equaling 3. Mm-hmm. And I guess my challenge is there a way for the 1 + 1 + 1 to equal 1? Mm-hmm. So the sense of a kind of unifying canopy. I mean, I also worry about the people in the heat. Mm-hmm. You know, the Girl Scout troop that comes down here in August, and they're lining up to go in, and it's hot. And of course that sun, not only to remind ourselves that it's hot, but that you can shape the people and collect that energy at the same time. So there's a sort of larger, even rhetorical way to sort of make the place more generous as a public space, and also actually increase the capacity of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I had the sort of same comment about the landscape. The sort of 2 panels, really, which is a classic National Mall strategy, the wetland panels. And it seems like that threshold is kind of abrupt as it relates to the rest of the landscape. So I'm looking for a little bit more in each of these cases. I'm also not convinced that the polar bear can survive a summer in that. I mean, I'm not sure the FRIT's enough, whether a more elaborate double skin.
Yeah.
And I did have one final question. Are the seals there for the polar bear?
So the seals are
I
not.
just have to ask.
The polar bears are not eating the seals. It's an illusion for the visitor to understand the relationship.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll let the Discovery Channel show that.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
but
no
I mean, fascinating. It's kind of a tragic project, which in that sense fits the commemorative landscape. You know, my first thought was, really, Constitution Gardens? But I think you've made a pretty persuasive argument about why this belongs there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'll take advantage of the microphone being right next to me. So I share Susan's comments about the sustainability aspects of your project and needing possibly could be developed to the next level. Mm-hmm. For example, I'd like to understand how would this building adapt to rising sea levels? Mm-hmm. And to that extent, the questioning of the site, would a site on the Potomac River or on the tidal basin have been more powerful because you could literally see what's happening somehow through the positioning of the building in the landscape, where having this reaction that what you've done is created an absolutely beautiful monument on in an appropriate way on the mall. But is that too precious for the sort of power and the drama of the message that you're trying to give to people? Is it all just too museum-like or too perfect for what you're trying to, the message you're trying to bring to visitors. But in terms of the formal, just because I think you've done such a good job at making a monument here, and what I really appreciate is the sense of experiential sort of procession that you arrive with this sort of pretty powerful view, looking through this thin axis to the gem, and then I'd like to see the sort of more perspectives or even a model or something that shows what this space is like as you're weaving between these two solid buildings. There's a sort of Salk Institute-like space where you're, instead of having a straight shot out to the end, you're kind of weaving back and forth and raising up and down. And these sections are really captivating, and you can see that would be an exciting space. And then when you kind of get there, I think that the way you handle both the metaphor of the iceberg, the formal kind of detailing of the glass prism, and the integration of optical those events kind of in that is really well done. Again, I think we could talk a little bit more about that sense of monumentality and whether that is in fact appropriate, but I want to point out a couple things that I thought you handled really well.
Thank you.
I just had a question about the word gem. I was a little surprised you chose that word instead of, say, ice or iceberg, which those diagrams in the lower right there really make me feel it's more of.
Yeah.
Is there a reason you chose gem?
I guess because it wasn't strictly an iceberg. I guess because it had that monument piece to it, I wanted to find a word that was kind of in the middle. And sometimes I think of gem as like an ice gem, or I don't know, or stone, a very beautiful stone of sorts.
I think the word gem to me feels like we're extracting minerals from the earth, which is a little bit of a different conversation than ice breaking away. So to me, I think those diagrams of ice are really great, and this feels like an iceberg that's barely hanging on and might break off and float away, which is sort of perfect narrative, right? So, and I really like this long section where you start to feel yourself going below sea level. One thing I thought might be interesting to explore is what if you actually in section went below and popped up into the middle of the iceberg, so there are no bridges, and you set the sea level to the actual sea level, and you really tell people that they're going below sea level and the water's rising around. Because I think the bridges feel a little forced. They don't feel, they feel a little circumstantial, like I had to connect this to this. And then all of the thoughts you said earlier about kind of immersion, I think if you could pop up into the middle of that iceberg and look back and see that you're totally detached from land, kind of furthers your story a little bit too. But I think all these thoughts are great, which is why it's fun to have this conversation. It's really well researched, and you're communicating a lot of ideas, and I think all of that's true.
Thank you.
I appreciate the thesis. I think it's very pertinent in the times we're living in. Creating awareness and having a physical demonstration of the rising sea level, I think, is an important thing, especially for the non-believers in the city. So it's kind of interesting that your thesis touches on that. I guess when I'm looking at, I agree with the comments about the procession, about your thoughts on how to locate this on the National Mall. All those things are very interesting to me. I guess I'm a little bit more curious, as this being a thesis of architecture, about the tectonics of things. How does that building actually hold itself up? What studies have you done on the actual curtain wall systems and glass systems to hold that? Did you do any models? Do I have a sense that a polar bear actually needs an X amount of square feet to live? And why is the polar bear alone? And looking at seals that it can eat, blah, blah, blah. So so I appreciate your thoughts, but I think that there is a level of development that I was perhaps expecting.
I'm concerned about the fact that you don't question the issue of the zoo in itself, in a way. You know, the idea of the zoo is still valid. It's still something. It's like the circus, you know, in a way.
Yeah.
It's a little different, maybe. But I think an architect, when he has a chance to do something like this, could criticize in some way also the program. So, do we really need a real polar bear there, or maybe something that shows that we can recreate a situation without using actually the animal? For example, that's an issue. Then I understand that you have to, let's say, make a building that somehow becomes very simple and clear. Oh, there is a polar bear. The kids want to go and look at the polar bear and so on. But the issue is not the polar bear, really. The issue is, you mentioned many other animals that are endangered. And it's much bigger than that. So there is a risk of giving a problem an easy solution, you know, in a way. And I think your project, I like it very much, by the way. I think it's very nice. I think the location is strong and so on. And but I see it more as an important building for generic environmental awareness and for generic climate change awareness. So the focus is on the polar bear. It's a little bit, as I mentioned, somebody has mentioned before, maybe too cute or too facilitate the issues, you know. On the other side, for example, I like to see how, I didn't understand exactly how do you demonstrate this changing in the level of water. You have this path that goes down, but I didn't quite understand exactly.
The water feature?
How do you feel physically this issue?
Yeah, so it's not the idea like you were talking about before, like sea level rising above you. It's more of the sense, so as you're ramping down, so here the water level is like 2 feet, and then down here it's about 5 feet. And then when you get down to the bottom, the water is above you sort of, like 8 feet. And then these water features are programmed differently to release more water as you get to the bottom. So it's that feeling of like melting and rushing water.
But at the same time, you get a sensation of much more water, which is the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, well, maybe you're right, but I don't think it's so clear.
Yeah. It's, yeah.
Because you're going down, and you should show that the water rises more than you're going down.
Yeah.
This building is in the floodplain.
It is in the
You
floodplain.
understand?
Yeah.
So therefore, I think you have to address that, and you have.
Yeah, that's true. I researched, yeah, there's this floodplain map, but they recently incorporated the flood wall.
Yeah, that's only protecting north of Constitution Avenue. Everything south of Constitution Avenue is in the floodplain.
Okay.
As the water rises, and so therefore your building is going to be inundated with water if it does in fact rise.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real opportunity in your building to demonstrate that, because in a sense that is your thesis.
Yeah.
More so than the preciousness of the polar bear itself,
Yeah.
himself, personally.
I think it's
Building
about,
on that, you have a lot of expensive
Yeah,
equipment
yeah,
down
all those
underground.
underground.
Yeah.
Where, in terms of resiliency, that is
yeah.
not very well adapted to
Yeah.
climate change.
Well, I wanted to make one comment, and probably being the only person from Texas here that can speak recently to hurricanes and global warming as it relates to flooding, water rising. That diagram up there in the upper right is basically was Houston, right?
Yeah.
So it happens, and it doesn't happen slowly. I mean, it happens so fast that there's a neighborhood north of Houston that got 60 inches of rain in 24 hours.
That's crazy.
Imagine that, right? And the last hurricane hovered over San Antonio for 3 days. This last year, or 2 years ago, we had flooding in our rivers that coming out of the hill country in Austin. And the rivers might be as wide as these columns, but they rose so fast that you could find literally tree trunks and other things stuck in the tree limbs as high as the top of the structure. And it's shocking how wide that goes and how fast that water is moving. It's dozens of people were killed. And so even though we talk global warming, we talk about water rising, it happens extremely fast. It's very dangerous. And in the rivers especially, it becomes very, very dangerous. And so that, aside as a whole separate commentary, I appreciate the site. A number of years ago when I lived here, I actually teamed with a group of folks that proposed on the World War II Memorial. One of the things that we did was similar, not too dissimilar from your progression down into this as you're kind of telling the story. We use the engagement of the history of the war and the parts of the war in these walls as we use the prow of a ship. So I appreciate the fact that you're using something that's like the iceberg theme. And one of the things that we also did was include the history of it. So I'm wondering if there might be one additional panel that you do that's everything prior to 2017. And I don't know when the first numbers of polar bears were counted, but I'm sure that there's more than 25,000. So there might be one that's historical that steps back, prior to 2017. And then continues on to when there are no more. But I can appreciate all those things. I think it's great.
Thank you.
Probably final comments. I reinforce a couple of things. One is that the purpose of Thesis is to demonstrate your capacity to take an idea and manifest it through architectonic terms and construct a narrative. And I think, irrespective of the criticism of issues that you can explore, you've done a fantastic job as an architect trying to diagram and illustrate a contention. Now I'm going to switch to a couple of things. One of my favorite buildings, which really dates me, is the Baltimore Aquarium. Because of that reversal of role that occurs when you exit inside the tank and the fish are staring at you as you go down through it. And that strikes me as kind of key to this in a way. It goes back to the comment about are you sinking into the water or whether it's water rising over your head. One other aspect of Thesis, if you get it right, is to demonstrate a bit of wit. And I think wit is a tough term architecturally to deal with. It's not joke, it's insight and it's invention. And the idea of this tectonic iceberg in the water really appeals to me. I think it could be far more kinetic than it is. I mean, Calatrava did that museum thing with the wings flapping at noontime, and it's a really bad joke. I mean, I've been there, I disliked it intensely, even though it just seems silly. But you have a chance, I think, to take your iceberg a lot farther in a different world. After your thesis is over and you're drawing at night for fun, how could you make this thing move and flap and sink and rise up and let the water rise up around it or whatever? I think your narrative might come across maybe more literally, but simplistically, and then the polar bear probably goes away, as one strategy. I think building monuments in Washington is fraught with all kinds of problems, as we all know, because they always become more static and ponderous than they should, which leads me back to the last comment, which is Mylan's Vietnam Memorial, where people are able to look at that and see in it what they want. You can see it as a negative condition or a positive condition, or as a memorial. But the understated abstraction of it isn't lost. So maybe being too literal about global warming and sinking iceberg is a little too much, I would fully admit. But it still, as an architectural problem, making a building that could kinetically sink or swim would be a lot of fun. But kudos for what you've done.
Thank you.
it's 2 o'clock.
There is a requirement.
Thank you.
It's my requirement.
Thank you. Thank you for
It's
reminding
my
me.
class.
I do have low voice.
This
so-
is my classroom.
So just to bring this to conclusion, first, thank you for all the reviewers. I get a sense you can have this continued discussion on this very interesting and critical topic afterwards. Right? So first, I want to congratulate you on such fantastic and successful project. And because you know and we know you have gone a long way to this point. So basically, Abby transformed her love for animals to this sophisticated and complicated project at this point. And during the whole process, sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's difficult and frustrating, and we know this. And there are two things, very important things I learned from Abby. First is to be brave and have the courage and the determination to take on such incredible design challenge. Because we all know the climate change and its impact is happening, and all the environmental impact are heartfelt around the world. And for me, I can testify, like you from Texas, I'm from China originally. So when I was growing up in China, less than 20 years ago, before I left China for the States, my childhood memory about China is blue sky, white clouds, clean water, and birds humming. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I can make sure, I can assure you, smog was not in our vocabulary. So you can see things can get worse very fast if we do not take the responsibility, if we do not respect the environment. So I really applaud for your effort to take on such important social issue and social responsibility, as particularly as a designer and as an architect, and use architecture as a means and a vehicle to educate public, and also to bring this issue to our attention, almost right in our face. So this is the first important thing I learned from you. The second important thing is your continuous and relentless pursuit of your idea. Because I know you asked about how the structure being supported, how the building being built, right? And we have a lot of conversation. There's just she's being too humble to explain all the things we go through. So we know how many details she has looked through the studies in terms of not only just the glass, the freight, and also double skin, all the things. She has spent lots of time to do the research, do the study beyond the typical thesis scope. So this is the second thing I learned from you. Lastly, I want to thank you for taking me with you on this journey.
Of course, thank you so much.